week 3 of the fantasy football season. Here's wide receivers start to sit every matchup this week. The first one, Thursday Night Football, Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. Tyreek Hill will start, finally over 100 yards, finally a catch, over 30 yards in last week's loss versus the New England Patriots. And Tyreek Hill, we know he's frustrated. We know off the field issues could be a problem for him. But as long as he's playing, he's going to work his way, I believe, into some production. And this week in a game where they could be down early and often and throw a lot, I think Hill works into production. Jalen Waddle, a fringe option. I know last week he found the end zone in that game was Jalen Waddle. But Jalen Waddle, I've said it in other videos, I don't think he's been that great over the last couple seasons. Injuries, decline in play have been a problem for Jalen Waddle. And this week, even in a matchup where they're going to throw a whole lot, he's a fringe option at best. Keon Coleman is start. I know last week was a bad game for Coleman, only 3 catches, 26 yards, but someone's got to catch the football over here in Buffalo. And I think James Cook, a lot of running so far in the early going, has carried this offense a little bit as well for Buffalo. But Keon Coleman, week 1, he went off over 100 yards, found the end zone. And I think week 2, versus the depleted and bad secondary of the Dolphins, he bounces back. Khalil Shakir, he hasn't done much so far in the early going, but this week with a decent matchup, I think he's a fringe option in deeper leagues. A number 3-4 wide receiver flex option. And Joshua Palmer is just not enough targets, not enough volume over there for Joshua Palmer in the early going. Bengals at the Vikings. Now with Joe Burrow out 3 months with a turf toe injury, we'll see if Jamar Chase and T. Higgins can keep it going. The production, obviously, it's going to take a hit. It's not going to be like it was last season for this Bengal team with putting up monster numbers, these guys. But Chase, last week, still had the monster game, 14 for 165, and he's locked in weekly as a top wide receiver. He's a start. T. Higgins a start, had a 42-yard touchdown in last week's game. I know this Viking defense is pretty decent, but I think Browning can make things happen, and we saw a couple years ago when he filled in for Burrow. They actually went 4-3 with Cincinnati. Now to the Vikings, Justin Jefferson to start. Jefferson so far, a little bit of a slow start for him. But I think, to be honest, Carson Wentz coming into the starting lineup now, and with his gunslinging mentality with Jake McCarthy out 2 to 4 weeks with his injury, this could help Justin Jefferson. We saw last season Sam Darnold had a good deep ball. It helped this offense, and it wouldn't be surprising me if Jefferson plays better with Wentz. Adam Thielen, Jalen Naylor sits. We haven't seen much out of these two players, even though I think this offense gets going a little bit more, and it's a more healthy pass attack with Wentz in their quarterback. One thing with Wentz, we know he throws a lot of picks, but he's a gunslinger and pushes that football down the field. But Thielen and Naylor, like I said, I got to see a lot out of them to put him in the lineup. Now to the Texans at the Jaguars division matchup. Nico Collins a start, found the end zone last week. Not a lot of options in this Texan offense. Pretty much it's been Collins, Nick Chubb in the backfield, and that's about it. So obviously he was a first early second round pick. He's a start. Christian Kirk, we'll see if he returns. I can't trust him anyway coming back. He's a sit. Jaden Higgins a sit. Xavier Hutchinson. So Higgins, I thought right away could come out of the gate and be a nice number 2 option this Houston Texan team. But obviously that hasn't been the case for Jaden Higgins. So Higgins, big wide receiver. They took him in the second round of the NFL draft. And he's someone to keep an eye on later in the year. But right now, this offense ain't clicking. Jacksonville, Brian Thomas Jr. a start. It's been a bad start, no doubt about it, for Brian Thomas in the early going for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. Week 1, a touchdown saved his day, and then last week, he didn't do much, but he did have 12 targets. I think this offense, they're going to get on the same page. Trevor Lawrence did throw for 3 touchdowns last week, so the football is moving down the field. It's just getting Thomas in the right spots and making plays. Travis Hunter, a fringe option. The problem with Hunter, they're just switching back and forth on defense and offense, and obviously that's going to take away if he plays the snaps from his offense. So Hunter, we know he's got big playability. We know he's the Heisman Trophy winner last season, but at best, to me, he's a fringe option. Just too inconsistent in this offense. Tommy Brown is hit last week. He had a nice touchdown. Was Tommy Brown. We know with the Commanders, he was a deep ball threat over the last couple seasons, but right now, it's a wait-and-see approach with Brown for me. Indianapolis Colts at the Titans. Pittman, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce all sits. I know Pittman week 1 had a nice game, 7 for 80 and touchdown, but these guys are going to be inconsistent all season long. And I've said in other videos, wide receivers with Daniel Jones going back to his Giant days really weren't productive week in and week out fantasy options. Even this week in a decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans, I don't really trust these wide receivers over here in Indianapolis. Calvin Ridley, a fringe option. Calvin Ridley so far, it hasn't been a good start. I know week 1, a tough matchup versus the Broncos in Sertan, one of the best corners in the league. And then last week only 3 for 57 it was for Ridley. So like I said, it's tough to trust him 100%. I know he's the number 1 target, but this week, fringe option at best. Manor, he's a sit for me in this game. He is the number 2 receiver. Drafted him this season in the NFL draft with his Tennessee Titan team. He went 4 for 56. Found the end zone last week. Definitely a waiver wire pickup, like I mentioned in my videos, but not someone I've put in the lineup right now. Vegas Raiders at the Commanders. Not much going on besides Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers in the early going in this offense in Vegas. So Jacoby Myers, yard after catch, very speedy wide receiver, easily the number 1 target in the receiving room. And this week at Washington, I like him as a starting option. Trey Tucker, Dante Thornton, this hits for me. Tucker, he's more of a speed guy, and he'll get like bubble routes and screens and stuff, but nothing more than that. This is Trey Tucker, and inconsistent targets it's been for him even since last season. He's a sit. And Dante Thornton, pretty much they're just telling him to run go routes and try to burn a secondary. We saw that a lot in week 2, and nothing happened. An interception and another pass was deflected. So Thornton, definitely big playability, big wide receiver, 6'4", 6'5", but right now, he's not a fantasy option. He's a sit. Commanders, Deebo Samuel will start. Right now, he's been operating as the number 1 wide receiver over there for this Commander team is Deebo. He's taking all the snaps. He's making the plays. And the main thing with Deebo's always been healthy. He's a start. Terry McLaurin, he's fallen down quickly in my rankings for me. Is scary, Terry. His numbers haven't been there so far. Holding out all off-season until he got his contract. And rightfully so. He got his money. He did what he had to do. But that does affect players. We saw with CeeDee Lamb last season, got off to a slow start. Brandon Ayuk, slow start, then he got injured. And right now, that's the same thing with McLaurin. Slow start and not much going. He's a fringe option. Rams at Eagles, this should be a good matchup, obviously. 2 high-powered offenses. And Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, this was pretty much wide receivers that are matchup-proof. Puka, last week, another big game for him. Over 25 fantasy points. And Adams, 6 for 106 and a touchdown. So these guys weekly should be locked in your starting lineup. Now to the Eagles, A.J. Brown, it's been a massive struggle for him the first 2 weeks of the season, but I think this offense is going to get the passing game going. Jalen Hurts, a lot of running himself it's been in the first 2 weeks, and obviously when Saquon Barkley's back there, he's going to get his 25, 30 touches per game for this Philadelphia Eagle team. But A.J. Brown, better home than he's been on the road throughout his career, and this week I think we're in for the breakout. He's a start. Devonta Smith, he's a fringe option. Smith's definitely a guy that's taken a hit on this offense over the last couple seasons since they brought Barkley in. I know last week he had 9.30 fantasy points, a big catch at the 2-yard line. It was for Devonta Smith. Upside really isn't there like it was in previous seasons. So to me, he's a back-end 2-3 option fringe this week. Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Drake London to start. Last week, this offense couldn't move the football in the passing game. It was the Bijan show for Atlanta, and Drake London pretty much didn't do anything, and he's not 100% as well with the shoulder. But this week, at a bad Panther defense, he's a start. Darnell Mooney a sit. Mooney, it was good to see him back last week, but obviously he didn't do much as well. And Michael Penix, he's still learning the ropes, still a very young quarterback. He's only had a handful of starts under his belt, but this week at Carolina, I think Drake London bounces back for the Panthers. Ted McMillan, 2 games, and he's played well in those games. This Ted McMillan, week 1, 5 for 68, and then last week had 6 for 100. So Ted McMillan, number 1 wide receiver coming out of college. He's shown it so far. Big playability, big matchup problem, 6'4", 6'5", where they can't cover him. And this week in a game where they're trailing most likely early and often, he's going to get peppered with targets and be productive. Hunter Renfrow, big game last week, found the end zone twice. Have to see more out of him. And Xavier Legette, he's been a bust so far. He can't create separation. He can't catch the football. He got 8 targets, which was good looks last week. And with Coker out, you'd think Legette would step up. But it's been Renfrow and these receivers as sits this week. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Patriots. DK Metcalf is start. Found the end zone last week. And he's the only viable option right now that has consistency week in and week out. I think it's going to be for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And we know Rodgers throughout his career, number 1 targets in the offense, always have been productive in fantasy football. So he's a start versus the middle of the pack secondary of the Patriots. Calvin Austin to sit week 1. Had a nice game with the Jets, 70 yards, a touchdown. And then last week disappeared. And that's been the story with Calvin Austin throughout his career. One good game and then he disappears for a few, and he's a sit this week. Stephon Diggs, he's a fringe option. Diggs so far doesn't look 100%, not all the way in on the playbook. And Drake May, he's a young quarterback, but he's a quarterback that already spreads the football out, and he's got a very good IQ at the position. So Diggs this week in a matchup versus a good secondary of the Steelers, a fringe option. Kayshon Boutte, so far he's played well in the early going. Week 1, 6 for 103, and then last week only 1 catch for 16 yards, but it was a touchdown. But we have to see more out of him before he's obviously a week in and week out option, so he's a sit. Green Bay Packers at the Cleveland Browns. Matthew Golden, Dotavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, they're all fringe options for me. Starting off with Golden, so far it's been a bad start for him in 2 weeks. He hasn't done much. Last week didn't catch a ball, had a couple jet sweeps, and then the Browns. Dotavian Wicks last week, he looked like the best receiver in this receiving room. Jaden Reed, we know, is out now 6 to 8 weeks with a collarbone injury. But this offense is another offense where Jordan Love spreads it out, and I've said it a decent amount. Tucker Kraft, to me, is a number one option, especially after the breakout game last week in this passing room. And Dobbs did find the end zone, but he's been inconsistent as well throughout his career. Now to the Browns, Jerry Jeudy, mixed bag so far in the first 2 games of the season. He's a fringe option, number 1 receiver in the receiving room. Him and Flacco have good rapport, and they're going to be trailing once again versus a great defense of the Packers. So he'll get his numbers in garbage time. And Cedric Tillman is sit, definitely a fantasy option. 2 touchdowns. Touchdown week 1 and week 2 with Cedric Tillman, but not enough consistency week in and week out yet for me to put him in the starting lineup. And this Brown team, they have other options like David Njoku and Harold Fanich Jr. as well that have been playing well. So right now, Tillman, definitely a guy to own, but to sit this week, Jets at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Garrett Wilson, pretty much the only guy in the passing game that's going to get plays his way. So he's a start each and every week. I know last week it was a down game. I know Tyrod Taylor possibly starting in this one with Fields and concussion protocol, but still Garrett Wilson, we've seen him with bad quarterbacks throughout his career go out there and have 1,000-yard seasons. Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka both starts. Evans last week, he made a big play towards the end of the game. The numbers haven't been great for Evans, but you know Evans, every year, he just finds a way to get to 1,000 yards and be productive. So this week versus Jets secondary, where Sauce Gardner most likely will be on him, but I think Evans, with his height advantage and speed and power, could work his way through with Emeka Egbuka. So far in his first 2 games in the NFL, he's got 3 touchdowns. He can run the routes. He's a speedy guy they've used in screen formations as well. And this week versus the Jets, he's a start. Denver Broncos at the Chargers. Cortland Sutton a start in this one. Last week, it was just a ball game that they were zeroing in on. Cortland Sutton was Indianapolis and made someone else try to beat him. And that was Troy Franklin, who had a touchdown, and Marvin Mims as well. But Sutton this week at the Chargers, even though they're a good defense, no doubt about it, I think he bounces back. Is a start. Troy Franklin want to sit. I know he had 8 for 89 and a touchdown. Definitely a hot waiver wire pickup, no doubt about it. But we have to see more besides one game from Franklin to start him, and the same with Marvin Mims. Found the end zone, but besides that, was quiet the rest of the game, so they both sit. Lad McConkey, Keenan Allen, both starts. Lad McConkey, one of the better possession underneath hands receiver in the league, and obviously he gets yards and yards after catch. He makes plays even in a game versus a good secondary. I think he goes out there and plays well. And Keenan Allen, I don't know how you could sit him. 2 games, 2 touchdowns already for Keenan Allen in the early going. He's getting a lot of targets. Him and Herbert have the great ESP and good rapport going back many seasons, and then last year went to the Bears, now back with the Chargers, and he's a start. Quentin Johnston, I know 3 touchdowns in the first 2 games of the season. Last week, a 60-yard touchdown at the Vegas Raiders, but the targets really weren't there much for Quentin Johnson, and if they didn't hit on that deep ball, he didn't do much. So Quentin Johnson, definitely a good part of this offense in a pass-happy offense, no doubt about it over here for Los Angeles. But this week, versus a good D, especially the secondary, is a fringe option. New Orleans Saints at the Seahawks. Chris Olave, he's not the number 1 target as of now in the passing game. It's been Juwan Johnson in the first 2 weeks of the season. Olave still getting targets, still putting up a decent amount of points, but just the upside is capped with Spencer Rattler, in my opinion, at the quarterback position. He's a fringe option. Rashid Shaheed is sit. Last week, a nice game in PPR leagues, 15.20 fantasy points for Shaheed. But like I said, the upside in this offense as a whole, the most the guy's going to get, 12, 15 fantasy points, I think, in the receiving room for this New Orleans Saints team. And this week, a tougher matchup versus a good defense of Seattle that went into Pittsburgh and had their way. So both these receivers, not high ceiling guys, But definitely guys in the bye weeks, that'll be options. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Cooper Kupp, their starts. JSN emerging as one of the better receivers already in fantasy football, only entering his third season. Number one option in the offense. Him and Sam Darnold have a good rapport. And this week, versus a bad Saints secondary, I think he has a big game. Cooper Kupp last week, after a bad week one, he bounced back, had a solid performance. In Cooper Kupp, he still could run routes. I know he definitely lost his step. He still has hands where he can make plays in Cooper Kupp. And it's about him and Sam Darnold getting the timing and rhythm down. And I think in week 2 in that matchup at Pittsburgh, they did way better than in week 1 doing that. Cowboys at the Bears, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, they're locked in his start. CeeDee Lamb, 2 games over 100 yards to start the year. I know some drop problems, especially week 1, were a problem where he could have had 200 yards in that game if he didn't drop passes. But Lamb is going to be a matchup problem for this secondary that just got roasted by St. Brown for 115 and 3 touchdowns. And George Pickens, he found the end zone last week. Dak was hitting him on some big third downs and key situations, and a late touchdown in the fourth quarter as well. So Pickens, it looks like him and Dak got the rapport down. And this week in a potential another high-scoring game for the Cowboys, they're both starts. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, their starts. I know Moore's off to a slow start in the early going for the Chicago Bear team, but DJ Moore, he's a veteran. They're going to get things going, I believe, him and Caleb Williams. And this Cowboy team can't stop anyone. He's a start. Rome Odunze, 2 games, 3 touchdowns for him. Last week, a monster game at Detroit. And this week, he could definitely shred this Dallas defense as well. So he's a must-start and one of the better receivers in the early going in his second season. Arizona Cardinals at the 49ers. Marvin Harrison to start. Last week, a bad game. After week 1, he had over 90 yards and a touchdown. Last week, 2 for 27. And that's just been the problem with Marvin throughout his career so far, going back to his rookie year last season. 1 good game, 1 bad game. But this week at Frisco, I think he has a decent ball game. They're a banged-up team as well. And this could be a mid-teens, low 20s type of game. Michael Wilson of City had a touchdown last week. But obviously this passing game is pretty much just Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison, so I can't trust Wilson. Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, their starts. The secondary of the Cardinals isn't really that good. And Ricky Pearsall, him and Mac Jones, they got to get rapport down. But Juwan Jennings last week, where I thought he wasn't going to play, he played with the shoulder injury. He had a nice game and found the end zone. So this week versus a mediocre Cardinal defense, both these receivers are starts in this one. Sunday night, Chiefs at the Giants. Both teams 0-2 on the season. Kansas City looks like they're going to get Xavier Worthy back, where the reports coming out of week 2 said week 3 most likely. Worthy, speed receiver, Caberna secondary, and we've seen Tyquan Thornton take that role over the first 2 weeks of the season, where he had a long touchdown. And Patrick Mahomes, he's playing good football, so Worthy, if he plays, which it's looking that way, he's a start. Hollywood Brown, he's a nice target for this Kansas City Chief team. He could run the routes. Health has just been an issue for him. He's a start. Juju Smith-Schuster, he's at the latter part of his career. He had some opportunities the first couple weeks, but we didn't see much out of Juju. He's a sit. Malik Neighbors, monster game last week. 2 touchdowns in that one versus the Dallas Cowboys. And we know this is a good secondary of Kansas City with McDuffie leading the way. And Kansas City at 0-2 is coming in at the Giants, going to be tough. But Neighbors, to me, he's a top-line receiver, obviously. He was taken in the first, early second round of fantasy drafts, and he's a start. Wan'Dale Robinson, a breakout game, 8 for 142 and a touchdown last week. But Wan'Dale, he's more of an underneath guy, but it's nice to see he expanded the route tree last week and had a big ball game at Dallas. But this week versus Kansas City, I'm going to temper expectations. He's a fringe option. Lions at the Ravens. St. Brown, he's a top-line receiver each season. Last week in the monster game, 9 for 115, 3 touchdowns. I know this Lion offense, they play way better at home than they do on the road. But St. Brown's a guy you put in the lineup weekly, even versus a good defense of Baltimore. But we did see week 1 Keon Coleman tear up this secondary. And Jameson Williams, it just takes 1 deep ball for him to have a day. And last week we saw it 2 for 108 and 2 touchdowns. So Jamo, even in the tougher matchup, like I said, if he just gets that 1 deep ball, he has a day. And I'll put him in the lineup, even though he's a back end 2, number 3 receiver. And now to Zay Flowers, he's a start, number 1 option in the passing game. Mark Andrews, he's been non-existent for this Baltimore Ravens team. And Flowers entering his 3rd season now. Definitely it could be a breakout, and Lamar and him have great rapport, and they're making plays. Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Walker, they're all sits. Bateman hasn't done much the first 2 weeks of the season. Hopkins, yes, he's found the end zone in each game, but he's playing limited snaps and the targets obviously aren't going to be there. So Hopkins, if he's not scoring a touchdown, he hasn't had value. And same with Devontae Walker. Last week, 2 catches, 26 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So what's the odds of that? Walker, he's a speedy wide receiver, no doubt about it, but he's the 4th wide receiver on the depth chart. And I know Lamar, he was just spreading out that Cleveland defense, but this week, we'll see if they spread out Detroit or they try to go heavy after Henry had a bad game. So that's wide receiver start sit every matchup for week 3 of the fantasy football season.